The blind alien princess was always alone, until a human attendant became her guide in a distant galaxy. Far beyond the stars known to humanity, there was a planet called Velith. Velith was home to the Velethians, a species of aliens who were known for their advanced technology, wisdom, and strength. The Velethians ruled over several star systems, their empire vast and powerful. But despite all their power, there was one thing they could not control: blindness. Celera, the princess of the Velethian Empire, had been blind since birth. Her blindness was not the result of an accident, but of a rare genetic condition that affected her entire species. The Velethians had long tried to find a cure, but despite their most advanced medical technologies, they had failed. It was something that the royal family had tried to keep hidden, fearing it would weaken the princess's position as the future ruler of the empire. As a child, Celera had been treated with great care and respect, but as she grew older, the pity in the eyes of her people became more and more apparent. They adored her for her intellect, for her ability to learn and lead, but they also feared her for what she could not see. It was a constant battle for her, trying to prove herself in a world where sight was everything, and where everyone saw her as fragile and weak because of her blindness. For years, Celera lived in the palace, surrounded by opulence but without companionship. Her only contact with the outside world was through her advisors and royal guards, who would speak to her but never truly interact with her. She would often wander the grand halls of the palace alone, listening to the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. She could hear the whispers of the servants as they passed by, and though they did not speak to her, she could feel their gaze, full of sympathy and curiosity. Celera hated it. She hated that her blindness made her feel so different from the others. She hated that she was always treated as if she were delicate, as if she were fragile. And most of all, she hated that her people thought she was incapable of ruling them. One day, as Celera sat in the royal gardens, listening to the soft hum of the palace's automated systems and the distant sounds of the court, a message arrived from the council. It was an official order from her father, the emperor. The message stated that a human had been chosen to serve as her personal attendant. The human was to help her with daily tasks, provide guidance, and ensure that she could live as normal a life as possible within the palace. Celera was not pleased by the news. She had lived her whole life without anyone to help her, without anyone to guide her. She didn't need help. She didn't want help. And certainly she didn't want a human, someone from a completely different species, to come into her life and take care of her. She had always prided herself on being independent, even if the world around her had made that difficult. But there was nothing she could do. Her father's word was law, and she was the princess. She would have to accept it. The human arrived on the following day. His name was Elias. He was tall and strong, with short, dark hair and eyes that seemed to constantly scan the surroundings. His voice, when he spoke to her, was calm and measured, and though he tried his best to be kind, there was something in his manner that Celera found unsettling. She could sense that he did not view her as fragile, but as someone to be pitied. He seemed to think that he had to be her protector, but she had no need for protection. She could take care of herself, or so she thought. Celera decided that she would not make this easy for him. She would not allow him to treat her like an invalid. If she had to tolerate his presence, she would make sure he knew that she didn't need his help. Days passed, and Elias went about his duties, helping Celera with simple tasks like arranging meetings with the royal council, ensuring her meals were prepared to her liking, and taking her on walks through the gardens. But Celera resisted him at every turn. She would refuse his assistance, insisting on doing things herself, even if it meant struggling with them. She would pretend that she didn't need help, even when it was clear that she did. But Elias never pushed her. He never forced her to accept his help. He simply stood by her side, ready to assist whenever she was willing to accept it. Over time, Celera began to notice something in him, a quiet strength, a patience that she had not seen in anyone else. And though she refused to admit it, she began to feel a small sense of comfort in his presence. One afternoon, Celera was sitting in the garden, listening to the soft rustling of the trees in the wind. She had been thinking about her life, about her role as the future ruler of the Velethian Empire, and about the impossible expectations that weighed on her shoulders. She could not afford to be weak. She could not afford to be the blind princess who was incapable of ruling her people. Elias approached her, his footsteps soft on the grass. He stood beside her, waiting for her to speak. After a moment, she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her tone almost accusatory. "Why did they send you? What do you think you can do for me?" Elias was silent for a long time, and Celera almost wondered if he would respond at all. But finally he spoke. "I came to help you," he said simply. "I don't see you as weak, Celera. I see you as someone who has the potential to be a great leader. I know that you can rule this empire even without sight, and I want to help you achieve that." Celera was taken aback by his words. She had expected him to say something about how she needed help or how she was incapable of doing things on her own. But instead, he spoke as though he truly believed in her. And for the first time in her life, someone saw her for who she truly was, not as a blind princess, but as a capable ruler. "Do you really believe that?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I do," Elias said, his voice steady. "I believe in you, Celera. And I'm here to help you believe in yourself." For a long time they stood together in silence, the wind rustling through the leaves around them. Celera felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that she had not known in years. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. She could be the ruler her people needed. And in that moment, she realized that Elias wasn't just her guide. He was the first person to ever truly see her, not as a princess who couldn't rule, but as someone with the strength to lead. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The days that followed were quiet, but they carried an undercurrent of change. Celera had always been accustomed to silence, the quiet of the palace, the quiet of her thoughts. But with Elias by her side, even in the most peaceful moments, the silence felt different. It wasn't oppressive or cold. It felt more like a shared space, a space where she could breathe without being constantly reminded of her blindness. Elias didn't ask for anything from her. He didn't demand her trust, nor did he push for her to accept his help. He simply accompanied her through her day, speaking when necessary, but always respecting her need for solitude. He seemed to understand that sometimes she just wanted to be left alone with her thoughts. His presence wasn't intrusive, but rather a quiet support. At first, Celera resisted his company, even as she began to appreciate his calming influence. She wasn't used to depending on anyone, and she wasn't sure she wanted to start now. It felt strange, even vulnerable, to allow someone else to be her guide, even though that was exactly what he had been sent to do. But over time, something shifted in her. She found herself looking forward to his company, to the calmness he brought with him. One morning, after a particularly grueling session with her advisors, Celera decided to go to the garden alone. She needed time to think. The weight of her responsibilities as the future ruler of the Velethian Empire was always on her shoulders, and it felt heavier every day. There were whispers in the court, rumors that the royal family's power was starting to wane. There were those who thought Celera wasn't fit to rule, and though they were careful to mask it, she could feel their doubts lingering in the air like a storm about to break. As she wandered through the lush garden, she tried to quiet her mind, to silence the thoughts that kept circling in her head. The soft rustling of the leaves in the wind was soothing, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to lose herself in the peaceful sounds. She could almost feel the life of the garden, each leaf, each petal, each root growing beneath her feet. The garden had always been her favorite place in the palace, and she felt a deep connection to it. She wasn't alone for long. A soft voice broke through the tranquility. "Would you like some company?" Celera's heart skipped a beat, and she turned toward the sound, already knowing who it was. Elias stood a few steps away, his posture respectful but open, waiting for her response. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She wasn't sure if she wanted company, but something about the way he stood there, not demanding anything, made her nod. "Please," she said softly, her voice quieter than she intended. "Sit with me." Elias took a seat beside her, careful not to invade her space but close enough that she could feel his presence. He didn't speak at first, allowing Celera to guide the conversation if she wished. For a while they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The only sound the soft whispers of the wind and the distant calls of birds in the trees. "I've been thinking about the Empire," Celera said eventually, her voice hesitant, as though the words were too heavy to say out loud. "And about the future." Elias nodded, though she knew he couldn't see it. "It's a lot to carry," he said quietly. "But you're not carrying it alone." Celera turned toward him, her expression softening. "I've always carried it alone," she said. I've always been alone. Even when I'm surrounded by people, I feel like no one sees me. Not really, not for who I am. Elias was silent for a long time, as though choosing his words carefully. I think, he said slowly, that people see what they want to see. They see the princess, the future ruler, the blind girl who needs help. But that's not all of you, Celera. You're more than that. She looked away, not wanting him to see the doubt in her eyes. Maybe, she said softly, but what if I'm not enough? What if I can't lead them? What if I fail? Elias' voice was steady, unwavering. You won't fail. You're not weak, Celera. You've already proven that. Her heart tightened at his words, but she didn't speak. She couldn't find the words to explain the fear that gnawed at her. Fear of not being enough, of never living up to the expectations that had been placed on her since the moment she was born. Fear of failing her people, of failing the empire. The conversation shifted then, moving away from heavy topics, and they spoke instead of lighter things, stories of their childhoods, small moments from their lives that had shaped who they were. It was strange to her, this easy conversation. She wasn't used to it. She had spent so many years alone, isolated from others, that she had forgotten how to simply be with someone. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the palace was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Elias spoke again. I know you don't like it, Celera, having someone help you, but if you ever need me, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. Her heart stirred at the sincerity in his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him completely, but the walls she had built around herself were thick, and letting someone in was not easy. I don't need help, she said, though she could hear the doubt in her voice. It wasn't a declaration, it was more of a question, a defense. I can do it on my own. Elias didn't respond right away, as though giving her time to figure out her own thoughts. Finally, he said, I don't think you need help. I think you just need someone to believe in you. To see you for who you really are and not just the princess. Celera sat in silence, the weight of his words settling over her like a cloak. She didn't know what to make of it. Part of her wanted to argue, to tell him that she didn't need anyone, that she could handle it all on her own. But another part of her, the part she kept hidden from the world, wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was someone who truly saw her, someone who didn't just see her blindness but saw her strength, her potential. In the days that followed, Celera found herself looking forward to her time with Elias. He didn't just help her with tasks. He made her feel seen, made her feel like she was more than the blind princess who would one day inherit a broken empire. He listened to her ideas, to her frustrations, and encouraged her when she faltered. He didn't force her to accept his guidance, but he was always there when she needed him. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult council meeting where her father had made it clear he doubted her abilities, Celera returned to the garden, needing space to think. She sat by a small fountain, the sound of the water calming her nerves. Elias, as always, followed her. I can't do it, she said, her voice breaking. I'm not ready, I'm not strong enough. Elias sat beside her, his voice gentle. You are ready, Celera, you've always been ready. And you're stronger than you think. For the first time in her life, Celera allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Maybe with Elias by her side, she could face whatever came next. The days grew warmer as Celera spent more time with Elias, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. It had taken time, but she had finally begun to trust him, truly trust him. It wasn't just the quiet conversations in the garden or the calm moments when he guided her through the palace. It was how he made her feel like she wasn't defined by her blindness, like she was more than just a princess waiting to inherit a crown. He made her feel like she could be something more, like she could lead. But with trust came something else, responsibility. As the heir to the Velethian throne, Celera had always known that one day she would have to take on the burden of ruling. But the more she learned about her empire and the way it was run, the more she realized that it wasn't as simple as just being crowned. There were hidden forces at play, people in her own family, in her own court, who didn't want her to rule. People who saw her as weak, as unfit, not because of her abilities, but because of her blindness. They didn't believe she could lead. And in a galaxy full of political intrigue and power struggles, that was a dangerous thing to be, someone who was seen as weak. Celera's father, the Emperor, had always been distant, not just emotionally, but politically as well. He was a ruler who relied on others to make decisions, a ruler who had built an empire not on vision or leadership, but on alliances and manipulation. In the quiet moments when Celera was alone with her thoughts, She began to realize that her father's empire was not the one she had always thought it to be. It was fragile, built on shaky ground, and the cracks were beginning to show. One evening, as Celera sat in her chambers, Elias entered quietly. She had been lost in thought, her mind racing with the possibilities and dangers of her future. The weight of the throne, the weight of her people, was pressing down on her. Elias had come to understand when she needed space, but tonight he sensed that something was different. "I can feel the tension in the air," he said softly, his voice a comforting presence in the room. "The council, your father, they're not just watching you. They're waiting for you to fail." Celera didn't answer right away. She had always known that her position was precarious, that there were those who wished to see her fail, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that nothing else had. She had lived her life with the knowledge that her blindness made her an easy target for those who sought power. But now, she was starting to see just how deep the threat ran. The people who surrounded her, her family, her court, her advisors, they weren't just afraid of her, they were afraid of what she might become. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. What if I fail them? What if I fail myself?" Elias sat beside her, his presence steady and calming. He didn't try to offer quick answers or empty reassurances. Instead, he simply listened, knowing that sometimes the best thing one could do for another was to be there without judgment. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I know you feel like you're carrying the weight of the universe on your shoulders, but you don't have to carry it by yourself. Let me help you. Let me be by your side." Celera turned toward him, her heart heavy with gratitude and uncertainty. "But what if I can't be the leader they want me to be? What if I can't measure up?" Elias looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to measure up to anyone's expectations. The only thing you have to do is be true to yourself. Lead the way you know how, not the way someone else wants you to. Your people need someone who understands them, someone who doesn't just rule with strength but with wisdom. And I believe you can do that." "I believe in you, Celera." His words touched something deep inside her, a part of her that had been buried beneath doubt and fear. For the first time in a long while, Celera allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be the ruler she had always wanted to be. Not the ruler her father had been, not the ruler others had expected her to be, but the ruler she could be. One who ruled with compassion and wisdom, one who saw her people for who they were and not just as pawns in a game of power. But even as she began to see a path forward, the danger of her position grew more apparent. The whispers in the court became louder, the tension more palpable. Celera could feel the eyes on her, the weight of every decision, every move, every word she spoke. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to fail. And if she did, there were those who were ready to take advantage of her weakness, to take control of the empire. One day, as Celera was in a meeting with her advisors, she noticed something unsettling. There was a shift in the room, a change in the way her advisors spoke to her. It was subtle, but it was there. They were no longer speaking to her as the future ruler, but as a child, as someone who needed their guidance. They no longer saw her as a capable leader, but as someone who needed to be controlled. Celera could feel the weight of their doubt, and for a moment she wondered if they were right. Was she capable of leading them? Was she truly ready? But then she remembered Elias' words, and something inside her stirred. She wasn't weak. She wasn't the princess who needed to be coddled. She was the future ruler of the Velethian Empire, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. After the meeting, Celera found Elias in the gardens. He had a way of sensing when she needed him, even when she didn't speak. He was waiting for her just as he always was. She didn't say anything at first, but when she reached him, she stopped and looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm going to take control of this empire," she said, her voice steady. "Not because I want to, but because I have to. And I won't let anyone stop me." Elias smiled at her, a warm, proud smile that made her heart swell. "I know you will," he said simply. "I've always known." The days that followed were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and long hours spent in the palace's many chambers, discussing the future of the empire. Celera worked tirelessly, making decisions that would impact not only her reign but the future of her people. But despite the weight of her responsibilities, Elias remained by her side, offering guidance when she needed it, support when she faltered, and unwavering belief when the world seemed determined to break her. It wasn't easy. The road ahead was filled with obstacles, with those who would stop at nothing to see her fail. But Celera was no longer the princess who cowered in the shadows. She was the leader who would rise above her doubts and fears, who would lead her people not with strength alone, but with the wisdom she had gained from her own struggles. And as she stood at the head of the council one day, speaking to her advisors with confidence and clarity, she realized that Elias had been right all along. She didn't need to be like anyone else. She didn't need to measure up to some ideal of what a ruler should be. She just needed to be herself, and in doing so, she would become the ruler she had always been meant to be. The days seemed to blur together as Celera moved deeper into her role. She was no longer just the princess. She was becoming a leader. Every decision she made was scrutinized, and every move she made was met with both praise and criticism. But this time, it didn't matter. She wasn't making decisions based on what others thought of her. She was making them because she believed they were the right ones for her people. Elias continued to be her anchor, the steady presence she had come to rely on. Though she no longer needed him to guide her in the same way she had when they first met, his presence was a comfort. He didn't just help her navigate the palace anymore. He helped her navigate the complexities of leadership. They would often talk late into the night, discussing the future of the empire, and as they did, Celera began to feel something that had been missing for so long: hope. She hadn't always felt this way. When she had first taken on the weight of leadership, it had felt like a burden, a task that she wasn't sure she could carry. But now she understood something she hadn't before. Leadership wasn't just about strength, it was about listening. It was about understanding your people, understanding their fears, their desires, and their hopes. And most importantly, it was about not giving up on them, even when things seemed impossible. But even as Celera grew more confident in her leadership, she began to sense the tensions that lay beneath the surface of the empire. There were factions within her court that were not pleased with her growing influence. Whispers of rebellion started to spread, and Celera knew that she had to act quickly before it was too late. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting with her advisors, Celera found herself alone in the garden, her mind racing. The whispers of rebellion had grown louder, and she could feel the weight of the impending conflict pressing down on her. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. Her father, the emperor, had always been distant, but now it seemed like he was actively working against her. He had never been the leader she had hoped for, but now she saw just how deep his indifference went. It wasn't just him, though. There were others, high-ranking officials, powerful families within the empire, who saw Celera's blindness as a weakness, who saw her as a puppet waiting to be controlled. And the more she tried to assert herself, the more they pushed back, undermining her at every turn. It was in this moment of uncertainty that Elias found her, just as he had so many times before. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood beside her, offering his presence in a way that made her feel less alone. She didn't speak either, not at first. She didn't know what to say, but after a long silence, she finally spoke. "Do you think I'm ready for this?" Celera's voice was soft, almost afraid to break the silence. "Do you think I can truly lead them?" Elias sat down beside her, his voice calm and steady. "I think you've already started leading, Celera. You've already made decisions that others would have hesitated to make. You've shown them who you are, and that's more than most people can say." Celera shook her head. "But that's not enough. They don't trust me. They see me as weak, as someone who will fall, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep pretending that I'm not afraid." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "It's okay to be afraid. Fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. What matters is what you do with that fear. You can let it control you, or you can use it to push yourself forward." Celera took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. Elias was right. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of failing, afraid of never living up to the expectations that others had placed on her. But maybe it was time to stop letting that fear control her. She looked at Elias, a sense of clarity beginning to take shape. "I won't let them control me anymore," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I won't let them decide my future for me. I will lead not because they want me to, but because I know it's what I'm meant to do." Elias smiled, a proud look in his eyes. "I believe in you, Celera. And I'll be here every step of the way." For the first time in a long while, Celera felt a sense of peace. The weight of the Empire's expectations still lay heavy on her shoulders, but she no longer felt alone in carrying it. She had Elias by her side, and together they would face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with new challenges. Celera continued to meet with her advisors, making decisions that would shape the future of the empire. But this time, she was different. She wasn't making decisions based on fear or doubt. She was making them because she believed in herself. And as she did, she began to see something else. Her people were starting to believe in her too. The whispers of rebellion hadn't stopped, but they were no longer as loud. There were still those who questioned her leadership, but there were also those who supported her, who saw her for who she truly was, not just the blind princess, but the ruler who could lead with wisdom and strength. And as she stood before her people, delivering speeches and making decisions, she could feel their respect growing. But even as her position strengthened, Celera knew that the greatest challenge was yet to come. There would be those who would stop at nothing to see her fail, to see her weakened and removed from the throne. The court was full of people who were only waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to slip up, and she couldn't afford to do that. One evening, as the sun set behind the palace, Celera stood on the balcony looking out over the empire. The lights of the city below twinkled like stars, and for a moment she felt a sense of calm, but it didn't last long. The silence of the night was broken by the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Elias stood beside her, his presence as steady as ever. "The night is quiet," he said, his voice low. Celera nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It won't stay quiet for long." Elias didn't speak at first, but when he did, his words were filled with certainty. "It never does, but you're ready for whatever comes next. I've seen it in you. I've seen the strength you didn't even know you had." Celera turned toward him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Elias smiled, his eyes soft. "I've always believed in you, Celera, and I always will." The night stretched on, and Celera knew that the challenges ahead would be difficult. But with Elias by her side, she was ready to face them. Together, they would confront whatever came their way, because, for the first time in her life, Celera wasn't alone. The days felt long as Celera continued to walk the delicate line of leadership. The palace had changed in subtle ways since she had taken control. It was no longer just a place of luxury and power, it had become a battleground. Every decision, every meeting was filled with tension. Yet, Celera found herself stronger than she had been before. She was no longer the girl who doubted herself. She was a leader now, and she had learned to trust her instincts. Still, the threats against her were far from over. Her father, the emperor, continued to stand at a distance, offering no support, no guidance. His indifference had become more apparent with each passing day. He seemed content to let his empire fall apart, his eyes closed to the chaos that was brewing beneath the surface. It was a frustrating reality for Celera, but she knew there was little she could do to change him. And then there were the factions within the court, the powerful families, the influential figures who had always held sway in the empire. They saw Celera as a threat, not because of her abilities, but because of her blindness. They believed that someone like her, someone who couldn't see, couldn't truly lead. They were wrong, but it didn't make their opposition any less dangerous. The whispers of rebellion had started again. This time, it was no longer just the murmurs of a few dissatisfied nobles. It was a movement, a plan being laid out in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Celera could feel it in the air, the tension, the unease. She knew that it was only a matter of time before they would try to overthrow her. It was on one such evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, that Celera found herself alone in her chambers, lost in thought. The weight of the empire's future pressed down on her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the familiar pull of doubt. Could she really do this? Could she really lead her people to safety and prosperity when everyone seemed determined to tear her down? The knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. She didn't have to ask who it was. Elias had been her constant companion for months now, always there when she needed him, always steady, always supportive. "Come in," she called, her voice soft but steady. Elias entered quietly, as he always did, his footsteps light and careful. He closed the door behind him and walked over to where she sat by the window. Without a word, he took a seat beside her, waiting for her to speak. For a moment, Celera didn't say anything. She just sat there, looking out over the palace grounds, her mind racing with thoughts of the rebellion, her father, the empire's future. But Elias didn't pressure her. He simply waited, giving her the space she needed. Finally, Celera turned to him, her voice low but filled with determination. "They're planning something," she said quietly. "I can feel it. The court, the families, they're all plotting against me." Elias didn't flinch, didn't show surprise. He had seen the signs too. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I don't know how to fight this. I don't have an army, not like they do. I don't have the power to crush them if they come for me." Elias looked at her, his expression soft but resolute. "You don't need an army. You have something much more powerful than that." Celera raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" "You have the truth on your side," Elias said. "You have the trust of your people. They're beginning to see you for who you really are, someone who can lead not because of your blindness, but because of your strength. You don't have to fight them the way they think you should. You just have to be who you are." Celera's heart stirred at his words. It was easy to forget, in the midst of all the political games and manipulation, that the people she was leading weren't her enemies. They were her family. They were the ones who had supported her, who had believed in her from the beginning. If she could earn their trust, she knew she could lead them through this storm. But the question remained, how? How could she stop the rebellion? How could she turn the tide in her favor without risking everything she had worked for? As if reading her mind, Elias spoke again. "There's one thing they don't understand about you. They think your blindness is a weakness, but it's not. It's your greatest strength. You see things they can't. You understand the world in ways they never will." Celera turned to him, her heart racing. "I don't understand." Elias smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "They see power as something you can hold in your hand, something you can control. But power isn't just about what you can touch. It's about influence. It's about the ability to inspire. And you've been doing that, Celera. You've been building trust one step at a time. You've shown the people that you don't need sight to lead, and that's what they're afraid of." Celera felt a flicker of hope rise in her chest. It was true. She had been building something in the hearts of her people, something that the court didn't understand, didn't see. But how could she use that to stop the rebellion? Elias seemed to read her thoughts again. "You don't have to do it alone. You have allies. You have supporters who believe in you. It's time to unite them. It's time to show the court that you are not the weak princess they think you are. You are the future of this empire." For the first time in weeks, Celera felt a surge of clarity. She didn't need to fight fire with fire. She didn't need to meet her enemies with the same force they used against her. She just needed to stand firm. She needed to show her people that she was ready to lead, not with brute strength, but with wisdom, with integrity. The next few days were a blur of action. Celera met with her closest allies, speaking to them about the threat that loomed over the empire. Together, they formulated a plan, one that didn't rely on violence or intimidation, but on the power of unity and truth. It wasn't easy. There were those in the court who were still set on undermining her, still determined to see her fail. But as the days passed, and Celera continued to gather support, the tide began to turn. Slowly but surely, more and more people came to her side. They saw in her something they hadn't seen before, not just a princess, but a leader. Finally, the day came when Celera was ready to confront the court. It wasn't a dramatic speech, filled with fiery words or threats. It was quiet, measured, but powerful in its simplicity. She stood before the council, her heart steady and strong. "You have underestimated me," she said softly, her voice carrying through the chamber. "You have seen me as weak, as fragile, but I am neither of those things. I am the future of this empire. And I will not be controlled by fear. I will lead this empire with wisdom and compassion, not with force. And if you cannot accept that, then you will no longer have a place in my court." The room was silent. Celera could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the council members on her, but she didn't flinch. She stood tall, unwavering. She had made her choice. She had chosen to lead, not by the standards of those who feared her, but by the strength of her own heart. And in that silence, something shifted. The rebellion, the threat that had seemed so certain just days before, began to crumble. It wasn't because Celera had crushed it with force. It was because she had faced it with truth. She had shown her people that she was ready to lead, and they had responded. As the council members slowly rose to their feet, one by one, Celera knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She knew that with Elias by her side and the support of her people, she could face anything. The future was hers to shape.